The heat shimmered above the cracked red earth, as the wind carried the scent of dust and diesel through the dry air of rural New South Wales. Beneath the rusted roof of an old sheep shearing shed, a crowd gathered, not for livestock, but for something far more unsettling. Today, like every second Saturday, desperate people sold what they could. Sometimes it was tools, sometimes it was dignity. Maishe, this time, it was children. Daisherokuma bega. Ivy and Esme stood barefoot on a splintered crate that served as a makeshift stage. 6 years old. Twins, though their spirits couldn't be more different. Ivy stood straight, jaw tight, eyes flickering like she might run if she knew where. Esme clung to her arm, lip trembling, confusion clouding her face. Their stepmother, rail-thin and reeking of stale beer, flicked her cigarette toward the dirt. 2 for 1, she drawled. They clean, cook, and they don't cry anymore, startin' at 100. No one moved. In the back, Elliot Wade shifted uncomfortably beneath his sweat-stained hat. Beside him, his 10-year-old son Thomas clutched his hand. Thomas, who hadn't spoken since the accident. Thomas, who couldn't hear the cruelty in the woman's voice, but could feel the tension in his father's grip. And then Ivy met Elliot's eyes. Not with hope, but with a silent kind of plea. And that was the moment everything changed. Elliot didn't plan to stop. He was just passing through to sell a rusted water pump for scrap. He had no space for miracles, and even less for strangers. But something about the way Ivy stepped in front of her sister, arms out, small and defiant, lodged in his chest like a splinter. $78, Elliot said suddenly, his voice rough and steady. And 35 cents. Heads turned. A few people chuckled. The stepmother sneered. You jokin'? That won't buy you half a goat. Elliot took off his hat. It's all I've got. But it'll buy them safety. A roof. A warm meal. That's worth more than what you're offering. Silence settled like a dust cloud. From behind the crowd, a new voice rang out. Female, calm, commanding. I'll cover the rest. A woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat stepped forward, her face mostly hidden by the shadow of the brim. She handed an envelope to the man handling the auction, then vanished into the blinding light outside without another word. The stepmother grabbed the cash and stomped off without a glance at the girls. Elliot walked forward, kneeling to their eye level. I'm Elliot. That's my boy, Thomas. You don't have to be scared anymore. The girls said nothing, but Ivy nodded once, her hand still wrapped around Esme's. They didn't smile, but they followed. And that was enough. For now. The old ute rumbled down the dusty road, its engine coughing every few kilometers. Elliot kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the seat beside him where Thomas sat silently, his eyes wide though unfocused. Ivy and Esme rode in the tray, wrapped in Elliot's only spare work jackets. He'd cleaned out a spot among the toolboxes and old fence posts, layering it with a frayed picnic blanket. Ivy sat cross-legged, arms protectively around her sister. Esme clutched a broken rubber band she'd found in the truck bed like it was a treasure. They said nothing the whole ride. Elliot glanced at them through the rear window again and again. He didn't know how to speak the language of children anymore, especially not ones who came from fire. But he did know silence, and how sometimes it could be louder than screaming. The sun was just dipping behind the eucalyptus trees when they arrived. Elliot's house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a front porch that groaned under its own weight. The screen doors stuck, as always, and the kitchen light flickered twice before it stayed on. Thomas went straight to his spot on the living room rug, his talking book clutched in both hands, silent as ever. Elliot showed the girls the pull-out couch. It's not much, but it's clean. There's blankets. You're safe here. Ivy examined the room like she expected it to vanish. Esme climbed onto the couch and immediately fell asleep, curled up like a kitten. Elliot stood in the kitchen staring into a chipped mug of tea. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight they were warm, And that was a start. Thus, the fireplace crackled as Elliot added another log, its glow casting gold against the worn floorboards. Ivy sat awake, knees hugged to her chest, watching the flames like they held answers. Elliot knelt nearby, not too close. "Can I ask your names?" Ivy hesitated. Then softly, "I'm Ivy. She's Esme." "Pretty," Elliot said. "Like wildflowers." She shrugged, unconvinced. "You hungry?" he asked. "No," she lied. Elliot nodded, rising. "There's stew if you change your mind. No one has to earn food in this house." He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "I'm glad you're here, Ivy. I don't know if I'm what you need. But I won't leave." In the silence that followed, Ivy leaned forward, pulled the blanket tighter around Esme, and whispered her name once, like a prayer. Then, for the first time in a long time, she closed her eyes, on her own terms. Morning came soft and uncertain. A breeze rustled through the screen door, carrying the scent of damp earth and old hay. In the kitchen, Elliot stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal with a wooden spoon worn thin from years of use. It was the same breakfast he'd made every day since his wife passed. Thomas was already seated at the table, fingers hovering above his empty bowl like he could feel the steam that hadn't arrived yet. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Elliot could read his hunger in the way he sat, still, expectant. Elliot set 4 mismatched bowls on the table. Then, after a pause, he grabbed the 5th and added it beside them. 5 bowls. 5 spoons. Ivy appeared in the doorway, holding Esme's hand. She looked like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to stand there, much less eat. "You don't owe me anything," Elliot said gently. "This is your home too, if you want it." Esme whispered. "Do we have to clean something first?" Elliot shook his head. "No deals. Just breakfast." The girls sat. Thomas smiled faintly, nudging his spoon toward Esme's, like an unspoken hello. Ivy looked down at the utensils. "They don't match." Elliot chuckled. "Nothing in this house does. Except us now, I guess." For the first time, Ivy smiled. Barely. But it was real. And that made it everything. Later that day, Esme tripped on the back step and scraped her knee on the gravel. It wasn't deep, but the blood made her gasp, louder than Elliot expected. Before he could reach her, Ivy was already there. She pressed her hand against the wound, calm and methodical. "We need a clean cloth," she said. "And the little box with the red cross." Elliot blinked. "You've done this before?" Ivy didn't look up. "Enough times to learn." She dabbed the cut clean, blew softly on it to ease the sting, and applied the bandage with quiet precision. Esme didn't cry. Elliot crouched beside them, watching Ivy's hands, steady, focused, far older than her years. "You've got a gift," he murmured. She shrugged. "No one else used to help, so I had to." But Elliot saw something in her eyes. Not just memory, purpose. The next morning, Elliot found an envelope tucked inside the mailbox. No stamp, no name, just a single bill, $100, and a note in looping cursive. "Keep going. You're doing better than you think." He looked around the empty road, as if the sender might still be there, but there was only wind and the sound of birds in the distance. His thoughts turned to the woman at the auction, the one in the hat who had vanished into sunlight. Who was she? Why them? He placed the envelope in the old drawer by the kitchen sink, beside the last birthday card Thomas's mother had ever written. Some things you don't understand right away. Some things you just hold on to. Over breakfast, Thomas tapped the table once. Then again. Then 3 times. Ivy froze. "He's saying something." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "You understand?" She nodded. We used to do that in the dark. 1 tap for yes, 2 for no, 3 for I don't know. We made it up when we weren't allowed to talk. Thomas turned his head slightly toward her, lips twitching into the faintest grin. I remember, Ivy whispered. Elliot's chest tightened. The boy who never spoke. The girl who always listened. Somehow, they understood each other. Maybe we keep that code, Elliot said. Could be useful. Thomas smiled. Esme giggled. And for a moment, the kitchen felt like something close to whole. The storm arrived with little warning, thunder rolling across the fields, wind slapping the tin roof like angry hands. The power flickered, then died. Elliot lit every candle he could find, including the cinnamon-scented one his late wife had bought but never used. Its glow filled the small house with warmth and memory. He threw together a stew from lentils, potatoes, and the last of the carrots. They ate huddled near the hearth, spoons clicking gently against chipped bowls. This smells like soup, Esme whispered. It is soup, Elliot smiled. She leaned her head against his arm. You're good at pretending things are okay. He chuckled. Only to kids who've done it too. They ate in silence. But not the sad kind, the sacred kind. Thomas asked for seconds, and Elliot pretended not to cry. How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. The receipt came tucked inside a children's picture book, one Thomas had left by the window overnight. Elliot nearly threw it out, thinking it was old mail. But the name stopped him cold. Second Light Trust, Distribution Office, V. Holloway. He whispered the name aloud. Holloway. It rang a distant bell. He sat down hard in the kitchen chair, holding the slip of paper as if it might vanish. A memory surfaced. An article years ago about Vivian Holloway, a tech entrepreneur turned ghost. Disappeared from the spotlight. No interviews. No fortune flaunting. Just gone. Some said she'd moved to the outback. Others said she'd lost someone and simply couldn't come back. The next morning, Elliot left the kids with the neighbor and drove 2 hours to the nearest city. He found the address, a plain brick office with no signage. Just a brass plaque that read, Suite 3C. He buzzed the door. A woman's voice answered, crisp but kind. Second Light. I think someone from here helped me. My name is Elliot Wade. I just want to say thank you. There was a pause. Then, come in. The door clicked open. Inside, everything smelled like clean paper and old sunlight. At the end of the corridor stood a woman in a cream sweater, no makeup, silver streaks in her tied-back hair. You're the man from the auction, she said. And suddenly, Elliot understood. Back at the farm, everything felt changed, though nothing looked different. The screen door still squeaked. The fence still leaned too far east. But Elliot walked through the house with quieter steps, like he didn't want to disturb whatever sacred rhythm had taken hold. Esme sat at the kitchen table, scribbling something on a napkin with a red crayon. When she saw Elliot, she grinned and held it up, a shaky drawing of 5 stick figures, all holding hands under a crooked sun. This one's you, she said, pointing to the tallest. Elliot smiled. I'm the one with no hair? She giggled. It's accurate. Thomas sat nearby, sorting buttons by shape and sound. Ivy, wearing a borrowed flannel shirt that swallowed her frame, was reading one of Elliot's old anatomy books. She traced each diagram with a fingertip, slowly, carefully, whispering the words under her breath. Later that evening, Thomas tapped the table 3 times. I don't know, Ivy said with a soft smile, remembering the code. He tapped once, yes, then twice, no, and finally, once again, yes. Esme leaned over. He's learning full sentences. Elliot watched them. One girl finding her voice, another learning how to heal, and a boy who once drifted now anchoring himself through taps and touch. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were becoming. The envelope came on a Tuesday, slipped under the door during the early hours when only the magpies were awake. Elliot nearly mistook it for another electricity notice until he saw the seal. Official, Government, Department of Family Services. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside. Legal guardianship of Ivy Grace and Esme Grace is hereby granted to Mr. Elliot Wade, effective immediately. No more reviews. No more temporary placements. No more waiting. He sat down at the table, the paper trembling in his calloused hands. Across the room, the girls were coloring with Thomas, unaware of the shift the world had just made. Later that night, he read it aloud by the fireplace. Siruko. Ivy said nothing, but her shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. Esme burst into quiet tears and buried her face in his shirt. Where? Thomas tapped once on Elliot's knee, then once more. Where? Yes, yes. They baked cookies that evening. Burnt, lumpy, imperfect cookies. Esme dropped flour everywhere. Ivy insisted on reading the instructions twice. Thomas added extra sugar when no one was looking. They laughed for real this time. And when the tray was empty and the stars had come out, Ivy whispered something as Elliot tucked her in. Thank you for choosing us. He smiled gently. You chose me too. The night Vivian Holloway stayed for dinner, it was meatloaf night, not a celebration, not a feast, just a modest, slightly overcooked loaf of ground beef, mashed potatoes with the lumps still in, and canned peas. But to Elliot, it might as well have been a banquet. Vivienne arrived with a warm loaf of sourdough wrapped in linen and a shy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes until Esme hugged her knees without asking. The children had scrubbed everything twice. Ivy wore a button shirt tucked into jeans that barely fit. Thomas combed his hair until it stuck up straight. Esme, sticky with flour, beamed with pride as she placed spoons at each seat, even a clean one for Vivienne. They talked over dinner about small things. Bugs in the garden, schoolyard rules, the strange shape of clouds. Vivienne listened like every detail mattered. Ivy says I'm going to be a doctor, Esme declared with a mouthful of mashed potato. She's not wrong, Vivienne said, glancing at Ivy. She's learning from the best. Ivy looked down, but her smile gave her away. After dessert, burnt-edge cookies and over-whipped cream, Elliot stepped outside to breathe. Vivienne joined him, folding her arms against the breeze. They're different now, she said. So am I, Elliot replied. You gave them roots. He shook his head slowly. They gave me a reason to stay. And in that silence, with the porch light flickering above them, it felt like something permanent had begun. It was Esme's idea. One quiet evening, after a day of weeding the garden and chasing dragonflies, she sat on the porch swing and asked, "Can we write to who we'll be one day?" Elliot blinked. Like future versions of ourselves? She nodded. So we don't forget how it felt to begin. He brought out paper, pens, and a shoebox. No ceremony, just 4 children and 1 man sitting on the worn wooden floor, under a sky slowly dimming into dusk. Thomas, with Ivy's help, traced his message letter by letter. I listen with my hands, that's my superpower. Esme's was written in purple marker with 3 smiley faces. Don't be scared to be loud. Loud can be loved too. Ivy's handwriting was neat, deliberate. Even broken things can be useful, especially hearts. Elliot hesitated. Then he wrote, Family isn't made by blood. It's made by staying. Vivienne folded hers silently, pressing it flat with both palms. She didn't share it. She didn't have to. The next morning, They tucked the letters into a tin box and placed it on the mantel next to the photo of all 5 of them, smiling crookedly in front of the fence. It wasn't a time capsule to be buried. It was a reminder to keep going. Because beginnings are fragile, but memories, written in love, are the threads that keep them from unraveling. Thomas stood barefoot in the backyard, a small shovel in one hand and a packet of marigold seeds in the other. The soil was damp from yesterday's rain and the morning sun stretched long shadows across the grass. "I want to plant something," he signed softly into Elliot's palm. Elliot knelt beside him. "What do you want to grow?" Thomas pointed to the seeds, then to a small tomato plant in a cracked pot by the fence. "Marigolds and tomatoes," Elliot smiled. "Tough and bright, good choices." Esme painted a sign from cardboard and glitter glue. "Rowan's Garden of Second Tries." She said the name out loud like it was a spell. Ivy helped dig the rows, pressing her hands deep into the soil, like she could hear something inside it. Vivienne stood to the side with her camera, not for social media, not for show, just for memory. As they worked, Elliot watched his son, once silent, once afraid, press a seed into the ground with careful fingers. "Things come back," Thomas said aloud, startling everyone, "even when the wind breaks them." Elliot felt his breath catch in his throat. Yes, they do. That night, after dinner, they all went back outside to check on the tiny mounds of dirt. Nothing had sprouted. Not yet. But hope doesn't always bloom in the ground. Trees. Sometimes it's in the planting. It happened in the school cafeteria. A younger boy, nervous, clumsy, dropped his tray near a table of older kids. Milk spilled, a sandwich hit the floor. Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel. "Can't even carry lunch right," one kid jeered. "Bet your mom still ties your shoes." The boy froze, eyes wide, shoulders curled inward. Silence followed. Tense, familiar. No teacher in sight. No one willing to step in, until Esme stood, small, barely 7, but steady. "That's not funny," she said, her voice clear and carrying. The older kids turned, one sneered. "Mind your business, orphan." Esme didn't flinch. "He is my business, because I know what it feels like to be too scared to speak." She took a step forward. Her voice didn't rise, it steadied. "I used to think being loud made me bad, but loud is just another way to care." The room hushed. Then someone clapped. Then another. And another. The boy with the dropped tray blinked like he was seeing a lighthouse in a storm. Esme sat back down and calmly returned to her sandwich. Later that afternoon, Elliot got a call from the principal. He braced himself. But the voice on the line simply said, "Mr. Wade, thank you. You're raising a leader." That night, over dinner, Ivy raised her glass of milk in Esme's direction. "To the girl with fire," Thomas tapped once on the table. "Yes." Esme just grinned, cheeks full of mashed potato. Vivienne Holloway didn't come with fanfare. She didn't arrive bearing donations or grand declarations. She came with a basket of oranges, a paperback novel for Ivy, and a small wooden puzzle for Thomas. She stayed for dinner. Then she stayed again. And again. Not every day. Just often enough to become part of the rhythm, like a quiet chord that made the melody fuller. She peeled vegetables while the kids bickered playfully. She helped Esme with spelling and challenged Thomas to feel shapes hidden inside pockets. She never tried to replace anyone. She simply showed up. One night, Elliot stepped out to the porch. Vivienne followed with 2 mugs of tea and a silence that didn't need to be filled. "You ever get tired of saving people?" he asked. Vivienne sipped. "I don't save people, Elliot. I stay. There's a difference." He looked at her, really looked. She had fine lines now. Worry lines, maybe. Wisdom too. But her eyes were steady. "I didn't think I'd be part of something like this again," she admitted. "You're not just part of it," Elliot said. "You're the reason it's whole." She reached over, gently took his hand. "I think I've been waiting," she whispered, "for someone to say that." The porch light flickered once, then held steady, and for the first time so did she. The kids were asleep. The dishes were done. The wood stove glowed low and steady in the corner. Elliot sat on the old couch, journal in his lap, pencil hovering. Across the room, Vivienne folded a blanket with the practiced grace of someone who had folded many alone. "Not tonight." "Do you ever think this?" Elliot gestured around the room. Drawings on the fridge, mismatched socks on the floor, laughter still lingering in the walls. "Was a miracle?" Vivienne shook her head. "No," she said. "A miracle is a moment. This is what happens after." He turned to her. "What do you mean?" "A miracle opens a door," she said softly. "But you still have to choose to walk through. To stay. To try. Again and again." Elliot looked down at his journal. He wrote slowly, "We were not rescued. We rescued each other. Not all at once, but in pieces. With choice." Vivienne leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to think love was something you either had or didn't," he murmured. "But now I think it's something you build." She smiled. "Every day. Even on the ones when you feel like you're failing. And the days you aren't," he added, "feel like home." Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, nothing grand happened. And yet, everything had changed. It began like any other morning. Birdsong slipped through the open window, soft and persistent. The kettle whistled on the stove. Elliot stood barefoot on cool floorboards, flipping pancakes while the dog snored under the table. Thomas arrived first, navigating by memory alone. He tapped the table twice. Yes, he was ready. "Maple or berry?" Elliot asked, already knowing the answer. "Berry," Thomas whispered, his voice stronger now. Esme followed, bouncing into the kitchen with a notebook full of scribbled speeches. She kissed Elliot's arm as she passed. "I've decided to run for class rep." Again. Ivy entered quietly, her hair pulled back, her stethoscope looped around her neck. Symbolic now, but meaningful. Her eyes scanned the table, checking, always checking. Vivienne came last, holding a basket of fresh herbs from the garden. She wore Elliot's old sweater like it had always belonged to her. Later, they all stood beneath the gum trees planting new seeds in what Thomas now called his garden of second tries. Ivy labeled plant markers. Esme painted rocks to guard the roots. Thomas pressed his palms into the earth and whispered to it. "God diocese." That evening, they ate together by lantern light. Ivy read aloud. Esme interrupted. Thomas laughed. Vivienne smiled across the table. "This house used to be quiet," Elliot wrote in his journal that night. "Now it sings." If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.